Welcome into Basketball by Association, the old BbA. Glad to have you guys aboard. Yet again, recording during a playoff game that is on the televisions around. I have personally turned it off, so I will not be distracted. Joel has not done that. I can
No,
see.
I absolutely have not, and will not. I refuse.
He just looked over and sort of saw the next score. We're talking about the Bucks and the Nets game. We'll talk about that coming up in just a minute. But Joel, let me welcome you in officially. Hello, sir.
Hello, and this is episode 64. We're into kind of an oddball span of numbers, some of which have never been worn by an NBA player before. The number 64 is indeed one of those. So as we've done in the past, we've looked at MVPs or rookies of the year, other notable people from those seasons. And I'm looking at the year 1964/65. The MVP that year was Bill Russell. He's already gotten an episode on this here podcast.
Yes.
And the next guy will be near and dear to your heart. But I was afraid because he wears number 19. I was afraid that perhaps we had already given him his due and an episode. But going back to episode 19, I looked and we had named that one after Lenny Wilkens. So we are safe to call this the Willis Reed episode, which I know as a Knicks fan, you'll be all about that. And even as a Nets guy, Willis Reed, I didn't know this, but Reed played, I believe it was like a season for the Nets at the end of his career and also coached the New Jersey Nets for a span during the late 70s, early 80s. So
yes, he did. He, by the way, outside of my youth and what I grew up to, the most famous New York Knicks moments ever.
Right.
Granted, it happened like 50 years ago, but still, it counts, Joel. It counts in the annals of history. Right, 50 years ago,
and I'll rescind part of what I said. There was no New Jersey appearance as a player for Willis Reed. Only in New York as a player. I had that wrong, but he was in the Nets management side of things after his playing career was done.
What was that game 7? That was that 70? I think that was 70. So it's at 70. Yeah, so 80, 90, 100. Oh my God, how old is he? Is Willis Reed still with us? I don't know, actually, to be honest with you.
Let's check out the old basketball reference. He is
he's still around.
78, yeah. He's 78.
Man.
In fact, his birthday's coming up 12 days from now on June 25th.
Well, hey, you know what? This one goes out to you, Willis. That's all I got for that.
I'm in agreement.
I don't really know what else to dedicate this program to Willis Reed. Sure, that's fine. And that is, I guess, as much Knicks talk as we're going to get on this program. Joel, there has been a lot to have happened. I want to ask you about a couple of procedural things, date-wise, that the NBA announced since we have last spoken. But first, let's get to the hoopy hoops themselves. Let's wait on Brooklyn and Milwaukee because a lot can sort of happen over the next 40 minutes or so while we're talking. That game has been weirdly back and forth, but not in like a typical back and forth way. It is.
Yeah, we might check in on them at halftime, but Kyrie Irving just went down with an injury, so we'll see how serious that is. He is down on the floor. The Nets are playing 4-on-5 at the moment.
Was it 2 weeks ago that Chris Paul went down and we were talking about like the?
It was. It looks like an ankle. Kyrie has rolled an ankle, so that's some breaking news we shall see. But it is serious enough that he is being attended to trainers and is definitely in some serious pain. One of those classic went up for a layup and just landed on Giannis's feet, and it is a full roll of the ankle.
Roll, baby.
Just seeing the replay. So I would highly doubt that we see him back in this game, and suddenly it's KD solo episode here.
Joe, what are we talking about 250,000 times on this show? These guys staying healthy and together. Granted, Kyrie's not been sort of an injury guy this year for the most part. He's had the last couple of years, but not so much this year. These three guys just haven't played a ton of basketball together, and still. But we'll talk about that maybe at halftime. We'll find that out.
Sure.
I want to talk to you about what happened with the Los Angeles Clippers of L.A. County. They get a humongous victory last night, which is by 26, which is, I think, Joe, you'd call that humongous in the playoffs, right?
I would, and they blew the game open
in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter, they got some breathing room by halftime. The Jazz were competitive through most of the game, but you're right, the doors kind of fell off. Then wheels kind of fell off, I should say, at the end for Utah. It's tough because we saw the Clippers play so poorly to start the Dallas series, then come back. They go 4-1 in their last 5 against the Mavericks, and it's not. The Clippers are really, to me, like, they're so in sync with what we think about Paul George, right? Paul George is a perfect microcosm of the Clippers in that no one questions Paul George's talents or what he's capable of. It's just the unknown of when he delivers that. When will it happen in crunch time? And when will it happen consistently for multiple games in a row? And I'm not saying necessarily that the Clippers go as Paul George goes, but it's certainly helpful when he's on. He had a really nice game in game 3. They get the win. Kawhi Leonard was really draped on Donovan Mitchell throughout that game. That may be an adjustment that we see the rest of the series, just as we saw Kawhi Leonard eventually deployed solely against what's his name from the Dallas Mavericks? How am I having Luka against Luka Doncic? You know, we saw that adjustment made, and Luka still had good games, right? But he had to work a lot harder, and it seemed to be effective overall. And the Clippers are playing that card now a little bit early. Mitchell did have 30 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists, but wasn't necessarily getting to his spots as easily as before. And that's really what changed, you know, when they had Kawhi and Luka as well.
Well, Joe, let me ask you something. When we talk about sort of being able to get an all-pro defender like Kawhi Leonard, you know, to be able to get onto somebody and to sort of reduce their effectiveness, especially someone like a Donovan Mitchell. With, I think, the way the NBA is now, do you think that, and the way the rules are specifically, and even to a degree the way the talent is, like, we just can't expect a Kawhi Leonard to go up and just reduce a Donovan Mitchell to like 11 points and 4 to 6 turnovers. Like, it's different. And talking about reducing their effectiveness, it's different nowadays.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. On the one hand, the superstars are still going to be able to, most of the time, get what they want, even against an elite defender. And you're right. In addition to that, because of the rule changes, you are not going to be able to do a full shutdown. But at the same time, when you adjust the timing and the rhythm of said superstar, where it takes a couple of extra shots or maybe another turnover here, another turnover there that wasn't there before, each and every possession matters, right? It's not just the analytics guys that understand that. The eyeball test guys get that too. Every possession matters. So even if you can adjust what Donovan Mitchell does over the course of a half dozen to 10 different possessions, whether, like I said, it's a few more missed shots or it took a little longer to get to that, and so the pass out to a different guy doesn't hit him in rhythm. Remember, the Jazz are very much a system kind of rhythm-driven team, and Donovan Mitchell and Jordan Clarkson really play kind of like the Manu Ginobili type of role for what the Spurs were. The Spurs were very rhythm-oriented, system-oriented, but you still needed a wild card, right? A guy who could get to different spots, disrupt things in a good way, and add that level of unpredictability. That's what Mitchell and Clarkson do. But if they have to take even more time to get there, an extra screen that wasn't there before, you still have that trickle-down effect to the other guys who are waiting for their rhythm looks. And now you're one hockey assist short on somebody else's look, and maybe they miss a shot. So that, I think, is the real benefit of elite defenders in the NBA today. And the Clippers have lots of other very good and decent defenders as well. They were one of the better defensive teams all year, and a huge story for them too, as I've pointed out throughout these playoffs. When the Clippers over-rely and it's just Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and they've only got like one other guy in double figures, they usually lose. When they've got two other guys at least in double figures and others that are close to that amount, it's not just that their total points go up, it's that, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard didn't have to carry quite as much of the burden and run every single possession through those guys, because remember, the Jazz are a really good defensive team too. They got 17 points out of Nick Batum, which is kind of a rare thing these days, and then 17 out of Reggie Jackson, who, let's be real, he's been very, very helpful for them throughout the playoffs. And we were looking at him as potentially the third string point guard through much of the year. He was a reclamation scrap heap guy that they picked up last year for their postseason run, and he's become one of their more important offensive players.
We talk a lot and do fun of playoff P, Paul George, and himself giving him that nickname. But he's had a pretty good playoffs performance-wise. And in game 3, he got 6 threes. I mean, 6 of 10 from beyond the arc. When Kawhi was hitting from beyond the arc, he was hitting elsewhere. But those two guys, you're right. It's not just as playoff P goes, so does the Clippers. But if you've got two superstars like that, which you're expecting playoff Paul for all that money to be able to play this time of year, that's why, Joel, you think they're the team that should win the West and win the title. But it's because they are good enough defensively. They do have a good enough top 2 stars, and a good enough depth on the bench too to be able to consistently play. It may not be the easiest brand of basketball that we've sort of watched in the world, but it's good team-oriented basketball with a couple of stars that can take over, and all of a sudden you give yourself that real shot to do what you thought you could do last year.
Yeah, and the Clippers aren't my pick, just to clarify. They're not my pick for the championship, but they were my pick to get out of the West. A lot of that is the Kawhi factor. I thought Paul George would have a bounce-back year, and more or less he has. The only remaining complaint that I have with George, he's been a lot wiser with his offense and a lot more effective. He's just hitting shots, and it's a make or miss league, for the old cliche. He's making them right now, which is great. Paul George coming into this union with Kawhi Leonard and with the Clippers was touted as a near equal defensively. We are talking about a guy who has been an all-team defensive player in Paul George and has been considered one of the elite wing defenders in the league. I don't know that we've necessarily seen him at that level. He's still a plus defender, but it really seems like a lot of the heavy lifting goes to Kawhi. It goes to Patrick Beverley. It goes to Nick Batum. It goes to Marcus Morris. Certainly the Clippers have enough guys, and maybe that's just not what George's role is. Maybe the Clippers have looked at that and said, Paul, we're not going to put you necessarily on the top guys. We just need you to hold down your end of the bargain, and we need the scoring aspect from you more. It's entirely possible that that's part of it, but I have seen what I would consider slippage out of George, where he's just kind of there. He's just kind of doing his thing defensively, but I don't see Paul George kind of instill his will defensively on teams anymore, and I haven't really seen that since he wore a Clippers uniform.
I don't know what he's waiting on either. I mean, they've been down 2-0 in both series so far. Like it feels like if it's still there and the desire to and the ability to play that. I mean, I can't imagine his ability being that far gone at this point. Maybe
he may be a different player,
That's true. Maybe his priorities maybe have changed in the way he sort of played. But if that is still there, I mean, you've needed it in both series. What do you think, Joel, about these series starting off so opposite with now being home teams win all these games?
Again, there's so much noise in that statistic from the Dallas series, and the Clippers, again, if they come in without a sense of urgency, without a sense of focus, they're very beatable. And for whatever reason, that focus doesn't appear on the court. Maybe it's there mentally, but it hasn't appeared on the court at very key times, which is so weird for such a veteran group and a group that includes guys like Rajon Rondo, and Patrick Beverley, who are both, very vocal types of leaders. We know Kawhi isn't. We know Paul George, when he's tried to be vocal, it's kind of backfired. That was not very well appreciated in the locker room last year, especially by other players, was the rumor at least. Nick Batum's never been really a vocal guy. Marcus Morris just kind of seems like he talks when he needs to. So it may just be that that's the mix of the group. And let's not take anything away from the Utah Jazz. Salt Lake City is an incredibly difficult place to play. And they had some really good home crowds to start this series, which we talked about in our previous episode. just fans literally chomping at the bit to get out there and scream their lungs out again. And they did that. And the Jazz, obviously the number 1 seed, and they've played well at home all the time. So I don't think there's any shame, honestly, in the Clippers dropping their first 2 games against Utah like there would have been with dropping the first 2 games at Dallas. That was truly troubling. This is going to be a series, but the Clippers, they got to stay in this. They got to win this next game at home. They got to shorten it down to that 3-game series because, again, it seems so obvious, but Utah has a game 7 in Salt Lake City if it goes to that. And don't underestimate what that actually means in this series in particular.
Well, the Clippers just want to play all the games possible in the playoffs.
Maybe that's it.
They're just like, man, we can't play 7 if we don't at least lose a couple. So let's get those out of the way early, and let's see what we can do. I want to ask you now about the Philadelphia 76ers, who proved their mettle in Game 2 to come back to even the series, and in Game 3 pulled away from Atlanta, and another strong outing from the Philadelphia 76ers. Big win in Atlanta to get that one. And now they lead the series 2-1. Do you think Philadelphia sort of, if they don't get down by 30 to start the game, do you think they just sort of are the better team and are sort of showing their playoff tested mettle in this case? Because it seems to me, outside of what happened in Game 1, you can even argue in Game 1 later in that game, the fact that they didn't just roll up and say, all right, we're going to Game 2, that they did try with all their might to come back. I would argue that that there is something to be said when we talked about going into the postseason, which is they're battle tested, they're tried, they're true, they know how to perform in situations like these, and they can take punches and respond.
I don't disagree with any of that. And I've never been a huge prior to this playoffs. I've never dug too far into we just have to want it more. We just have to play harder, because there's truth to that. But a lot of times that's kind of empty coach speak, especially in the NBA, sure. Especially in the playoffs, where a lot of times it is adjustment. It is the chess match sort of thing. But I will say this, most of these series, whether it's been in the second round or there were certain series in the first round too, certain teams that walked in and seemed a little lackadaisical got punched in the mouth by other teams that were ready to take advantage of that. And it wasn't until they ratcheted up their own intensity that you saw them get into it. The Bucks are a perfect example of that. Lackadaisical offense and not hitting the boards and not rotating quick enough. And you didn't see a fire and an urgency. And that was really the case with Philadelphia and Atlanta in that Game 1. The Hawks were able to take advantage through hot shooting. The Sixers looked disjointed defensively. They were flying all over the place. They were very reactionary. And then they were kind of passive on offense, even though Joel Embiid had a great game. We talked about it before. They were not able to get into the lane and create collapsing defenses. That changed during the run when the Sixers started to come back at the end of Game 1. They also started trapping a lot more. They were just more active all over the place. They played with urgency and they fell just short. But I think we saw the blueprint for what was going to be taken into these games 2 and 3. And looking at Game 3, that's again what I saw. I saw Ben Simmons finally being a difference maker as a scorer, not just as a guy who can bring the ball down and make the right pass. And to give Simmons some credit, by Game 2, he has moved to basically the full-time defender on Trae Young. That's a lot of work.
It is.
And the ball's not always going to be in his hands, and he's done a really nice job defensively. However, Doc Rivers is on record as having continued to challenge him. Like, dude, you got to keep getting to the basket. You got to collapse that defense. You don't always have to be driving with the goal of passing. You have to be able to convert some of that inside. We've seen post-ups for Ben Simmons. And what it does is against an Atlanta team that's got some decent defenders. They've got a lot of long, rangy wings. They've been very competitive on the defensive end, but just adding another guy who is a threat spreads the focus out, right? It's a little less focus that you can pay on Joel Embiid. That's huge. It's a little bit less crowding that you can do on somebody like Tobias Harris or Seth Curry. Don't underestimate how big that is, especially when you had a guy like Danny Green who also couldn't hit the broadside of a barn through games 1 and 2. And we've seen Green do this throughout his career, where he will go like 3-4 games very, very cold and then heats up. Now Green is out with a thigh injury. Furkan Korkmaz comes in, gives him 14 points and a trio of threes in game 3. And even though Korkmaz is a minus defender, whereas Green is still one of the better wing defenders, the fact that Korkmaz is probably going to soak up those minutes and at least can hit, that bodes well, I think, for Philadelphia, as long as the rest of those guys kind of pick up the slack on the defensive end that Green leaves.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Simmons had 3 shot attempts in game 2.
Right.
Like, just shot it 3 times, had 4 points. And he comes back and, 5 from 8 from the field, 18 points. Like, he was so much more aggressive offensively.
Right, and he got to the free throw line for 8 shots. Now, he only made half of them, but that's still those are drawn fouls against the other team that did not exist in game 2, right?
They're drawn fouls, and they give you the opportunity at least for buckets. And listen, you could do whatever you want in a game. If you give me a shot at a free point or 2, I still feel like I want that opportunity, like unguarded, untethered. That's what I'm kind of hoping is the best case scenario, is for as many open shots as possible. Can I ask you briefly about Trae Young and the Hawks and sort of where they go from here? Because they took a big gut shot in game 1. And in game 2, Shake Milton comes in and is a monster catalyst for that team. And pulls them away from Atlanta. Game 3, you get Ben Simmons to come in and actually play aggressively. And Joel Embiid's still playing good basketball too. He's had a very fine series through the first 3 games. How do the Hawks respond if the 76ers are starting to get more of this production from guys who they haven't seen him do it for like 2 or 3 weeks, and B, guys that they should be getting the production from?
It's a great question, because we're starting to see the Hawks pulled in different directions defensively. They're chasing a lot at this point. They're not forcing quite as many turnovers. Trae Young, because he has Ben Simmons on him, and Simmons is so long, such a bigger defender, we're seeing Trae get shots still to the lane, but a lot of those threes are much more contested than before. Simmons is able to recover and get a hand. We've even seen Simmons like tip or block a 3 here or there. That sort of thing was not happening to Trae. So he's not getting quite as many easy looks from outside. I still see him slithering into the lane, but here again, kind of like we talked about with Kawhi, he's getting into the lane, but it's not always with like a full head of steam and clear, a clear alley in front of him to get to the basket. It's, I got into the lane, I got a look, but there was a hand, it was contested, or it took me a couple extra steps. And by the time I was able to kick it out to a shooter, that shooter was a little more guarded, a little more contested than previously. So it's easy to go, yeah, all right, Trae had 28 points, but he needs to step it up. I don't even see necessarily a problem, like a key problem guy from the offensive end. It didn't help that Kevin Huerter only hit 1 shot. He had 3 points in game 3. That is a guy that they need to be on, because he was a pressure release valve for them. But then again, Danilo Gallinari had 17 points, although he has not hit a 3 or did not hit a 3 in game 3. So they shot 26% from downtown. Some of it goes to the point of, yeah, guys got to hit their threes again, stretch that defense out, take the onus off of Trae. Somebody, now that Danny Green is out of the rotation, has got to really attack Korkmaz, and you can go at Tobias Harris a little bit at least. You're going to have to, and certainly Seth Curry, you're going to have to go at those guys. And so these secondary players that don't have Ben Simmons on them really need to have a great game. But defensively for the Hawks, I think it's make that adjustment that Ben Simmons is going to be looking for shots, force more turnovers, get back into the passing lanes. Maybe you go for a little more single coverage to Joel Embiid, and you just try to keep guys home, but play in those passing lanes a little bit more. But it is tough. Like, this is where I think you see the disparity of the Sixers. We saw clear adjustments. Now with the Hawks, it's like Philly's the better team. We know that when at full strength, they're the better team. There's only so much you can do if you're Atlanta, but you are talented enough. You got enough scoring that the series isn't over necessarily. It's just there's a whole lot less room for error if you're the Hawks.
No, and I think if Philadelphia wins game 4, it's over. I think Atlanta needs to get one at home. It needs to get this one.
That's probably true.
At home. If not, Philadelphia's going to wrap this up probably in 5. But that's because I think you're right. I think they're the better team. And the guy who has played MVP type basketball when he's healthy and on the court, and even now when he's a little sub-healthy, and Joel Embiid is playing like you would expect a Joel Embiid MVP candidate to have played like. He is playing like he is the number one option on his team. He is the guy who gets buckets when he needs the buckets and the leader of this team. And remember when we were talking about like who's the leader of this team, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, like a couple years ago, like it's clearly Joel Embiid's team. And so Joel Embiid is the centerpiece and the focus of this team. And it's so satisfying to see it working finally for Philadelphia to sort of this degree that it seems like it's in sync. It seems like the team is rallying around this opportunity to be able to win. And I don't know who they may have in the next round. We can talk about that if it ever happens. But right now, it just sort of feels like their time. That gut punch they took I would have felt less good about them. And that's the way I want to say it. Yes, less good. I would have felt less good about them had they had stayed on the ground and not fought back in game 1. If that game is like a 17-point loss and they just milled about the final 2 quarters, the final half of the game, I don't feel nearly as good as I feel about Philadelphia now that they fought back, had a chance to get back within 3 within a minute to go or 4 within a minute to go of that game, and to be able to assert their will in the second half and later into the of game 2 and then of game 3. I think this is a team that's built for the long run, and that's why I've sort of picked them, and we sort of both think this is sort of their year to win that championship.
What I feel really good about is watching Embiid in game 2 and 3, his movement versus game 1. And we talked about it on our previous show too. Game 1, yeah, he had a lot of points, but a lot of it was step back jumpers. It was gingerly kind of running down the court, almost at half speed. When he would get into his little step back jumper, it was, again, kind of very gradual and gingerly on that leg. Like he didn't have a lot of torque on it, a lot of leverage when he was down low, unless he had point blank range where he had absolutely just backed somebody down. It didn't seem, or got there first, it didn't seem like he had that leverage to get underneath Clint Capella or John Collins, neither of whom weigh a whole ton, by the way. They're really, they're nice defenders and lanky guys, but they're not like bulky centers. He couldn't necessarily bully people out of the way. Games 2 and 3, I've seen him moving much more freely up and down the court. It looks like he's not in pain, whether they've got the knee really numbed up for him and figured out what they wanted to do, or maybe it's just to a point where it's manageable. But he's been explosive enough to get off the ground for some nice dunks over people with movement. He's been able to pivot around guys just to really do the typical Joel Embiid stuff that we see. And no, he can't do it alone. I would be wary of overtaxing him. But you saw in game 3, 27 points, 9 boards, and the big one for me, 8 assists. Like he's playing within himself, and other guys are able to pick up that little bit of slack that might be left. Because I don't think he's 100%. But he sure looks like he's 85 and 90% right now, and that's been good enough to dominate.
Oh, yeah. Imagine 85% of Joel Embiid, and he's able to be this dominant on the court. Like, you don't want 100%. Let's just put it that way. You don't want 100% Joel Embiid right now. The Bucks lead the Nets right now by 5 at the half. I wanted to be able to take this time to sort of talk about a little bit of this game and how the series has gone. Milwaukee in game 2, by the way, 53-48 at the half. It's almost as many points as was scored in the entire game 2, or game 3, I should say.
Yes,
That
was
Milwaukee, especially after that first quarter looked like there was that first half was one of the most bizarre halves of momentum shifts in playoff basketball that I've seen, I feel like, in a while. At one point, Milwaukee was up 30-9, at one point, and then the game was basically even at halftime. So, like, to imagine in the conference semifinals, these two teams duking it out. And by the way, everybody played. I should say everybody. The guys you expect to step up and to put up the points in the production were putting up the points in the production. Kyrie and KD, they were playing pretty well in game 2. They gave them every bit the chance to try to hit that last 3 at the end of the game to tie it and send it to overtime. Milwaukee, Joe, I'm just going to be honest with you. They got the win. I don't know anything to say about this game. I don't know what to feel about Milwaukee after game 3, and I feel a little better game 4, but like I don't know, like that game easily could have gone other way, and then we're talking about a chance for Brooklyn to get out of Milwaukee with a sweep.
Yeah, and this first half is again kind of the same story where it could be the other way, and the Nets could be up 5. It could be a sweep game 4, like you said. So much of this goes back to, again, which Giannis are we going to see on a possession-by-possession basis? Are we going to see the guy who's taking 3 dribbles to nowhere and passing, who's kind of half-heartedly at half speed, going one-on-one with somebody, sort of collapsing the defense solely for the purpose of passing out? When he has attacked, when he has been around the basket and refused to be taken off of that block, good things have happened for the Bucks. They got to feel pretty good right now that the threes are finally starting to fall again. Maybe this drought, which was through the first 3 games, is starting to dissipate now. Giannis had 16 points at halftime, but still so many possessions that you see where it's like, Giannis, why are you driving only to kick to a half-guarded PJ Tucker? You don't want PJ Tucker shooting the ball 7 times in a half. Now, granted, PJ's got 11 points right now. It's 3 of 6 from downtown. Good on you, PJ, for making some shots finally. But if PJ Tucker has 7 shots in a half and Brook Lopez has got another 5, and you are driving to those 2 guys, setting them up as if those are the guys you want taking shots out of the possession, you have a major problem. And again, this goes back to Giannis because he's been kind of the trigger man for some of this. It goes back to Mike Budenholzer. The Bucks are another one of those like system offensive teams, but they have the ability to ride Giannis and get out of a system if they need to. And when I'm watching them in this Brooklyn series going, I don't see any system. I don't see any ball movement. So where is the system? You've abandoned that. But I also don't see your one guy who's capable of playing above and beyond the system doing that. This is why Milwaukee has been in such big trouble. Now, granted, Harden goes down. Don't underestimate the loss of James Harden, or this could have been a sweep based on how poorly the Bucks played. And don't underestimate the loss of Kyrie Irving right now, and we don't know his status. But again, like I said, highly surprised if we'll see him in this game, and we'll see longer term in the series. So the Bucks, they might be gifted some life support here that they honestly, truly did not deserve. But let's see if they can take advantage of it now going forward.
Sham Sharani is reporting as of 2 minutes ago, Kyrie is out for the rest of game 4. Yeah. So with the right ankle sprain. So you are correct. He is,
and it was a high sprain, which is the bad kind.
Yeah, he is going to be out for game 4. And listen, as poorly as the Bucks have played, I think they put up 27 3-pointers in the first half. Okay, I don't know. Okay, but that's fine. Like, they got 11 of them to go down. That's nice. That's cute.
That's better than before, at least.
True. You know? Shooting 41% compared to the 35 that Brooklyn is shooting. Giannis 16-6 right now, and that's okay. I never want to say this because it's hard to win at this level in the NBA, but it almost feels like they're winning by accident. Right? Like, it doesn't feel like, it feels like they have just enough talent now because of the recent couple of losses injuries wise for Brooklyn, that the reason they're up 5 now is kind of because they've been able to play a little bit of hero ball with Giannis and get a few more shots to go down than normal. Because I'm with you, this aside from the pure numbers of threes that have been thrown up, which is, I mean, Milwaukee shot like the 3rd highest number of threes all season in the NBA. this doesn't feel like a team that sort of learned from the mistakes they made in the first 2 games, and is, I think, fortunate to be up right now. Go in game 4. Now they're given a fortunate opportunity to split the series, and that maybe because 2 of the 3 big guns for Brooklyn are gone.
I don't disagree with anything you said.
Okay, good. We can move on.
I guess I don't understand how many more games we can see Drew Holiday struggle. I don't understand how many more games we can see Chris Middleton be ineffective.
Chris Middleton's played 23 of the 24 minutes in the first half.
Yeah, and has 9 points, and again, a lot of ISO tough shots. And guys are getting the ball when they're not in position, they're not in rhythm. Nobody looks sure of anything. And, you know, we talked about Giannis at length, and it's just so jarring a difference of what we saw in the Miami series. And you go, was Miami really that bad that Milwaukee looked that good? Or are the Nets truly doing something that none of us have figured out exactly what it is yet, besides like showing up and competing on the defensive end? Like, what is happening? It's just the dichotomy between 2 series. To me, you only see that when a team, you know, gets through the first round and then shows up against an opponent that they're truly physically and talent-wise outmatched by, where they're just outgunned. And you're like, yep, nice job in the first round, guys. And then you ran into the real big boys. That's not what happened here, because Brooklyn's got tons of talent, but they're not head and shoulders above where Milwaukee is personnel-wise. And when you watch what the Bucks are doing, they're just playing in to the little that Brooklyn has done. Brooklyn has no rim protection. None. 0. The only guy who protects the rim is named DeAndre Jordan, and he hasn't appeared in like 30 games for Brooklyn. Like, and how do you not fully take advantage of that? And we see them do it for short stretches, and then they don't.
That's 72 points in the paint in game 1.
And they should have had 100.
Yes, they could have. It should have kept. Game 2 should have been like, we're not leaving the paint. We're attacking the basket every single chance we get there. And instead, no, not any of that actually. Anyway, let's go to another big boy. Final series to talk about. Phoenix is about to sweep Denver. Mr. Joel Cordes. This is not something we saw coming, and I'm a little worried about Mike Malone at Denver and the adjustments that they have made. I think he said after game 2 that we're gonna play the lineup that wants to be here and wants to battle the most, and made no changes to the lineup. So I guess they all wanted to be there and sort of battle the most. How is Phoenix been able to be this effective against Denver for all 3 games?
There's a lot of different reasons. I'm going to concentrate on the Phoenix side first. We saw this against the Lakers. The Suns have been one of the best teams at getting to their spots, at getting into the lane, at getting cutters, at getting drivers into the mid-range, generally just being able to attack from a lot of different angles. We give a lot of credit to Chris Paul for that. He's one of the best ever at not only doing that, and usually has had a good head on his shoulders about when to score versus when to pass. But Devin Booker, who has played point guard for these Phoenix Suns before in a couple of years of his career, they had tried to mold him into a point guard. That training has come into it's come in handy. And then you've got DeAndre Ayton kind of playing the classic short corner dump off guy, but Ayton is more talented than just that role that Tyson Chandler and DeAndre Jordan and Clint Capella played. You can give the ball to Ayton and do some post-ups. He's got a better than advertised mid-range jumper. He hasn't exploded for a high point total game, but he's absolutely somebody you have to check with a body at all times. And that guy having to check him is usually Nikola Jokic. Jokic does not protect the rim, despite the fact he's an MVP. He's not a rim protector. And typically the help defense he plays is when he can move over on a rotation and wall a guy off, kind of use that bulk that he has and take away a lane. But when you've got Jokic who has to stick to Ayton so closely, we're seeing a lot more open lanes because Jokic can't get there. He's stuck on Ayton. And Paul and Booker are taking really nice advantage of that. Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges have done a great job as backdoor cutters. We've seen Cam Johnson and Dario Saric do the same thing. And Paul and Booker are so good that not only can they get into the lane, and if you give them a free run to the basket, either of them can finish, especially Booker at this point in his career, but they're both knockdown mid-range shooters. And Denver, out of the initial pick and rolls, does not have an answer. We compared the Nuggets backcourt defensively to kind of what they had faced in Portland, where Denver had to play with, against Damian Lillard, they had to play against CJ McCollum. Their backcourt was overmatched, but they had some advantages in the front court. Those advantages really have diminished because, yes, Booker and Paul can score the way that McCollum and Lillard did, but they're both better defenders than Lillard and McCollum are, especially Chris Paul. And yes, Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon remain very talented, although Gordon only had 4 points in game 3. And the Blazers had Robert Covington and their other guy who they had just picked up from the Raptors, whose name is escaping me, but I'm going to move on. Anyway, they had some decent defenders up front, but the Suns do as well. And the Suns guys up front in Bridges and Crowder are hitting their shot. So there's been a lot more two-way play from the Suns to be able to take advantage of what Denver was already weak at to begin with, but then to make up for any disadvantages on the other end, which was something Portland was unable to do. And back to the DeAndre Ayton thing again, Jokic had to guard Yusuf Nurkic with the Blazers. That's another ground-bound, slower-moving center. Ayton's ability, again, to play above the rim, I don't think can be overstated here. Just the threat of that has changed the dynamics quite a bit, and Denver does not have enough answers right now on the offensive or defensive end. The Suns, who I was not ready to say were the better team, I picked Denver to win this series. The Suns flat out look like the more complete team. The word that I keep using for them over these last couple weeks is surgical. They just pick their spots and they take advantage of it, but they do that over and over and over again. And neither the Lakers and so far the Nuggets ever had an answer for that once the Suns got locked in.
Yeah, it seems like they've been better coached. It seems like they have a better sort of rotation of guys that sort of know their strengths and are able to accentuate their strengths. They've had a few really good performances this series from certain guys, whether it's Chris Paul going silly or whether DeAndre Ayton. I mean, you mentioned he doesn't have the big giant point total. I mean, he's gone 15-10, 15-10, 20-10, like in this series. Like he has been a huge boost for Phoenix, and I'm not surprised that they're winning any of these games. I'm surprised that they're dominating, and I'm surprised that they're pulling away in these games and just glad-handing holding these teams at bay later in games. I'm surprised that the margins have been so profound in these 3 games, and they're the favorite again to win tonight and to sort of put away the series. I mean, I hate to say at this point that we'd be expecting a sweep, but I really honestly don't know what else Denver does except for hoping a couple of guys don't play nearly as well that could sort of change their fortunes of the first 3 games. I think after 3 games, when you've sort of had your run at getting prepared for them and then adjusting to them for 3 games and then getting games at home too, I think you kind of are what you are in this series. And I think Denver is just the lesser of the 2 teams after we've seen the first 3 battles.
And let's be real here. Even though both of these guys are helpful rotation players, they've proven that they belong in the NBA. Facundo Campazzo and Austin Rivers is not a starting backcourt for a championship caliber team. No. They're just not. And it's not their fault that they've been pressed into duty like that with Jamal Murray being out. But I'll go to something that the Denver Nuggets did, which I thought was a mistake last offseason. When they got rid of Torrey Craig and let him walk to the Bucks, they never replaced him with another I guess, defensive specialist guy in that backcourt. PJ Dozier was supposed to be that guy, and he's been hurt. So now you're down Dozier and Jamal Murray. Yes, Will Barton had a nice point total and was +2 on the night. Monte Morris played 30 minutes and gave you 21 points. He was only -5, which actually isn't that bad in a game you lost by 14 points. Mm-hmm. Those are your two more talented guys, and you're having to bring them off the bench so that you have some punch. But Barton is not a good defender. Campazzo is a scrappy defender, but very undersized, and he's overmatched with Chris Paul. Austin Rivers is a replacement level defender at best. We saw him get torched a ton by Damian Lillard in the previous series, and Devin Booker's getting whatever he wants against him. Monte Morris is, again, a plus defender, but is not necessarily a lead defensive guy. And you look down the Nuggets roster, they literally do not have an answer. Even on paper, they don't have an answer for what the Suns are throwing out there in their backcourt, which, of course, is the Suns' strength. And then, as I spoke about before, Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. have not been able to pick up the slack on the offensive end to overcome those shortcomings. You can credit Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges if you want. You can throw shade on Gordon and Porter Jr. if you want, but both of those things are true. And the Nuggets are not able to overcome what they're giving up elsewhere on their starting five.
The Suns are here, man. The Suns are here. They are here. And as we mentioned, I think after the first round was finally over, it's wide open. There's no reason why this couldn't be the team that represents the West to try to play for a championship at this point. I mean, here again, this is true as of right now. We will get a totally different test for these Phoenix Suns in the next round when they've got to face Kawhi Leonard or and Paul George if it's the Clippers. It would be a much better matchup,
right? And Patrick Beverly. You've got a roster there that's equipped to much better defend a guard-centric team where everything kind of flows through those backcourt guys. And honestly, like Utah, if Mike Conley is healthy, and I failed to mention him when we were talking about the Clippers, that's a really big loss for what Utah does, even just as a minutes eater, but also as a plus defender. Even if it's the Jazz, that's a totally different amount of calculus defensively than what the Suns are seeing from the Nuggets right now.
Yeah, I think we mentioned it before this series. Like this series, preseason one way. Excuse me. Right now, this was a series that matched up pretty well for Phoenix and gave them a good shot to be able to win. None of us said sweep. And technically sweep hasn't happened yet. But they just look really, really, really effective. I watch Phoenix, and the thing I notice about them is that when you talk about going to the Los Angeles series and into this one, there are so many consecutive games where, like, I'll just turn on the TV, and if I'm a few minutes late, like, my jaw's on the floor. Like, they come in and they will punch you in the mouth early, and it's not one of those feeling around adjustments. I mean, they're leading by 10 in Game 3 at the end of the first quarter. It's like, hey guys, I just got here. Give me some game to watch.
And there's that youthful exuberance matched with veteran urgency. Mm-hmm. And it's that very type of impression that you get. It's an eyeball test impression for sure, but it translates into the numbers. It's that very thing that you see out of the Suns that we go back and lament and are like, well, where is that from the Bucks? Where is that from the Clippers consistently, right? And the Suns have brought that, and that is an intangible. It's something that seems so easy that you should be able to have all the time, and certainly like hustle's got to be matched with execution and all that good stuff too. But the hustle and the drive has got to be there, and the willingness to just take advantage of people, put your head down, get to the basket, and then fly around defensively. Like the Suns are better than advertised on defense, and they have been all year. They're active. On paper, they've got some guys who I think are playing above their reputation, but that's a good thing in this case. You'll take that all day, and that energy translates from their defense back into good offense. When you've got a guy, a master orchestrator of a fast break like Chris Paul, and a master orchestrator of early offense, plus a guy like Devin Booker who can just create out of early offense, you get that energy amped up, and guess what? It's a lot easier to go back down on the other end and do it all over again and force that turnover or get a big stop from Ayton or Bridges or whoever, and then turn around and fly down the court again. And the Suns, what's really crazy, they always have that reputation as like a fast run and gun team. Pace-wise, they're not really all that past the NBA norm. No. But they're very, again, here's that word, very surgical about when they deploy that fast break, and they do it to great effect. And then they've got that wisdom of Chris Paul that when it's not there, you don't force it, you get into your offense, and now you can search for good mid-range shots for Paul. You can search for Devin Booker creating something for himself or others, or way too many times you get DeAndre Ayton or Mikal Bridges flying in from the backside for a lob. Like it's a lot of fun. They're playing basketball the right way on both ends.
Yeah, and like if you weren't paying attention, guys defensively they're pretty good too. Just if you just sort of came into the playoffs thinking, oh, look at all these kids not scoring a whole bunch of points. That's what Phoenix has always done. 7 seconds or less. That's all I've known. Paul Westphal. This is what I know this team to do. Very different. Very, 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 very different. Joel, that's going to do it for us here on this here podcast. Good discussion points too. As we leave, we should mention that at least on my scoreboard says the Bucks are up by 14 halfway through the third. Is that copacetic with what you're seeing on the old boob tube?
It is indeed. Although it looks like the Bucks just lost Pat Connaughton. Hopefully, it's a temporary thing. Looks like it was a facial injury. He was kind of waving off the crowd as he left. Obviously, Connaughton. Important for them. It looks like he took an elbow. Ooh, might have broken his nose. Took an elbow to the face from Joe Harris on a rebound attempt. Connaughton not quite as critical to what the Bucks do as Kyrie Irving is to the Nets. But obviously we wish good health and a safe return for both of those guys because nobody wants to see playoff basketball, derailed by health injuries. You want the better team to win at full strength when it's all said and done. But I will mention this as we go out. As always, if you're listening to us on Spreaker or Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts and you want the video version, you can find us over on YouTube. Just search Basketball by Association or BbA. Please like, share, subscribe, get the notifications, all that good stuff. And the Willis Reed episode number 64 is in the books.
All right. Answering the call we did with Willis Reed. How about that? Joel Cordes, thank you for your time. We'll speak again Wednesday when the Suns will probably have already won the Western Conference Championship.
Looking forward.